Tomorrow, all eyes will be on the Minister of Finance as he delivers the budget speech. But there's a crucial issue that often gets overlooked: the struggles of the middle class. While they contribute heavily through taxes and are not dependent on government support, many find themselves trapped in a financial squeeze. University fees continue to rise, pushing families into debt, while their children caught in the gap don't qualify for financial aid like NSFAS necessarily. Now, this has led to rising dropout rates and a generation burdened by education costs. As we approach tomorrow's speech, we delve into the missing middle, those who pay the price but receive little relief. Well, to unpack this further, we now roped in Thokozile Madonko. She's a researcher at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies and Public Economy Project based at Wits University. Thank you so much for your time, Thokozile. Perhaps let's start with just getting your expectations for tomorrow's budget, especially given that there's so much hope of some form of relief or reprieve for overextended parents especially. What are you looking at? What can we expect?
Good afternoon and good afternoon to your viewers. Unfortunately, I don't have a very optimistic picture for you. I don't have a lot of good news, mainly because we are told in October already what to expect for the budget in February. So the medium-term budget policy statement came out last year and really spoke to real government consumption spending falling, which basically means that the role of government in the economy is contracting. And so the government is going to be spending less on public services and on the provision of services. And what does this mean for the missing middle or the struggling in-betweens? Is that it is going to be much harder to access private services or universities because it is fee driven, or the TVET, and also because of the challenges that NSFAS has faced. It was receiving an increased amount of resources, but since 2024, the allocation to NSFAS has actually been coming down. And coupled with that, and we've argued, and colleagues of mine have argued in the research that we've done, is that we are dealing with inverted priorities. And what we need to see in the budget tomorrow is a renegotiating of policy and practice. So what the president said in SONA, we want to be able to see that in the rands and cents to be able to deliver on the promises that he made in SONA. But to date, we've been seeing this disconnect or an inverted policy priority, where we have a situation where we want to see enrollments increase, but we're not increasing the budgets to NSFAS, we're not increasing the budgets to universities, we're not increasing the budgets to universities to maintain their infrastructure. And so these universities can't even build on-campus housing that was in your insert, for example. They don't have the capacity to just maintain their buildings, let alone develop new housing stock for their students. So it's completely inverted. The budget is going against what is spoken about in terms of the priorities, where education is a key component for any kind of growth, that if we want to be talking about growth in the economy, we need to look at education.
So when we look at then the struggles of the middle class, where to then for them? I mean, especially, considering that you also focus on inequality in this country, maybe paint a picture in terms of how that looks like, particularly for this set of, hardworking South Africans who also struggle, as we are just hearing from you now, from financial aid schemes like NSFAS.
So there's a lot of, research and debate about what is the middle class in South Africa. And given our levels of inequality, that we know from, if we just take the NSFAS definition, it's between households earning between 350,000 to 600,000 a year. Now, we know the majority of South Africans are nowhere near that. And so when we look at some of the household surveys and the kind of definition of middle class there, they talk about, do you live in your own home? Do you have access to electricity? So it's a very basic. It doesn't ask questions about affordability. Can you afford that home? Can you afford that electricity? So in terms of inequality, we have what many have argued and researchers have argued is obscene inequality in South Africa. So we have this very small, not even 1%, that is, really reaping the benefits of democracy, and a large majority that are struggling to make ends meet. And so when you have the promise of higher education, as has been the case over the last couple of years, it was a huge reform that we were going to open up higher education and make universities and TVET colleges available. We needed to put money behind that in order to develop the infrastructure and the resources to be able to cater for the needs of students. Now, I could go a little bit more radical and say we shouldn't even be talking about fees. It should be free higher education if we are serious about addressing inequality and poverty in this country. And that's at basic education and at higher education, the full kind of cycle. What we've seen in the budgeting process has been a trade-off between basic education and higher education, with basic education getting severe cuts. And we've seen this with the teachers. They can't afford their wage bill. We've seen it with, the lack of transformation in terms of pit latrine toilets and so forth. And so where that money was directed was to NSFAS, which has transformed our universities and TVET colleges quite fundamentally. But at the same time, we've cut the core university core funding. So that is for funding lecturers, for funding, equipment and maintenance, and all the things that you need to run a university education system. And so it becomes this real pressure on. It's kind of a double-edged sword for hardworking South Africans who are trying their best to get their children through really difficult and sometimes expensive basic education, and then to then get stuck at higher education and not being able to afford it, or to be able to afford the auxiliary necessities like housing, for example, or buying a laptop or whatever you need in order to succeed at a higher education.
Thokozile, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. I think you've covered all the points that we wanted to discuss today. Appreciate it. Thokozile Madonko there for us, and she's a researcher at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies and Public Economy Project based at Wits University.